Thank you so much for taking our time on your Friday evenings and joining us. I will give just a quick background to, I guess, the attempt we are making here, and we will hopefully dive quickly into the session. So the intent of this series is twofold, which is that while in general, again, there is no dearth of webinars, and I know people are tired of it, we thought we want to discuss micro topics. In a way, the intent is things. This is not a rags to riches story. And I know Krish is a very successful entrepreneur, but this discussion is not about how he started from 2 people and became this massive company that he's already become. This is about taking a very specific functional topic, understanding what are the nuances, and in particular, focusing on a slightly early stage so things which you may be able to think about on Monday morning kind of discussion, that's the intent. Number 2, is that while for each of these topics that we take, there is one anchor guest, which is Krish, and I'll introduce Krish very quickly soon. But as you will see, there are other people who are visible on your screen. It is a discussion. It is actually not meant to be a panel. And I want to emphasize that. So first 15, 20 minutes, we will have Krish set the tone where I'm going to ask him a few questions. Thereafter, it's open. When I say it's open, it means that all the people, whether they are visible on the screen or not, they can ask questions. And anybody on the screen can also take an attempt at answering those questions. So, because everybody here has either been a SaaS entrepreneur or an investor, hopefully they all have sort of certain things to contribute. So feel free to ask, feel free to answer and contribute to that discussion. So that's sort of the quick background. One last comment based on the last last session. Please keep your questions relevant to the topic, which is about inside sales. And I'm going to come into it. Before I do that, let me introduce Krish. I think I met Krish for the first time in late 2013 or early 2014. And as we will see in this series, I will be repeating the statement many, many times. I'm certainly guilty of not investing in Chargebee. At the time I met Krish, I must confess, I loved meeting him. And clearly one of the marquee founders in the SaaS space coming out of India. I just couldn't get my head around at that point in time. But ours is a business of multiple regrets and not one. And that's what we just learned to live over a period of time. But Chargebee, which is a company which is helping SaaS companies or other subscription-oriented companies in managing their subscriptions. That's what Chargebee is about. And over a period of time, clearly Krish has built this into a massive machine. And what is very impressive about what Chargebee has done is, I thought that this was a very crowded space at the time even Chargebee started. But the way Chargebee has created a space for itself is just very, very commendable. He is also one of those individuals who every time you meet, you learn something. I have clearly spoken to him one-on-one many times, heard him in SaaS Boomi and other platforms, but there is something to be learned from Krish in every single episode.
Look, let's keep the hype low.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the expectation becomes too much, and then if the answers don't measure up, there is a problem.
No, I need to put you on the pedestal here right now, Krish. So, with that background, I want to come to the topic here first, which is that in the last 10 years, I think if there is one very clear advantage India brings to the table for SaaS companies, it is actually around remote sales. This is not to say that our development costs aren't lower. Our customer success costs are also lower. But inside sales from India has given a reach to companies, and that reach or access was very hard to create in a completely feet on street model. So if I may say that if Salesforce or the likes of them invented inside sales in the early 2000s, I think companies like Zoho, followed by Freshdesk and Chargebee, these are the companies that have mastered and scaled the art of inside sales from India for SaaS. So the intent of today's session is to dive a bit deeper into inside sales in terms of when to think about it, how to build it, what are the gotchas, and hopefully you guys will ask questions on what you want to learn about it. So that's going to be intent to To kick it off, Krish, one of the first questions, at least I have, is that I at least make the assumption in my head that inside sales is not the solution to all problems, which means that at least I am assuming that there are certain kinds of products or some kinds of situations where this might be more relevant vis-a-vis other situations where it is not. So whether it's to do with the product or customer segment or ACV, would just love to get your thoughts to begin with on where would you think about applying inside sales in the first place?
Everywhere. So before that, right? So the definition, right? If the definition of inside sales versus outside sales, right? The technical definition is whether is it face-to-face meeting? Does it require a face-to-face meeting, or can you sell through one of the technology channels, which is phone, email, or through a video call? Can you make a sale, right? And right now, so that is definition of inside sales, right? And then there are nuances to this, right? Are you leveraging your team that is actually here selling globally, or do you want to hire teams that are closer to the customers in those geographies, but still they are inside sales, right? So I would say, depending on the ACV or the complexity of the deal, the skill set of the salesperson that you want, you can choose to hire people in different geographies, right? And all of that, but it's still, all of that is still inside sales. And then there is a certain nuance to the misunderstanding which we generally tend to have, which is inside sales, inbound channel, outbound channel, and partnership as channels are different. So the difference is inside sales is just the medium through which you are selling. The channel is how the customer found you or is engaging with you. Did you reach out to the customer through a cold introduction? That's the job of a BDR, a business development rep, who's trying to figure out, having a list and then trying to reach a customer, creating that into a warm lead from a cold lead, is a BDR process. And then once it becomes an opportunity, then again goes through the same remote selling process, which is inside sales.
Right.
Somebody who comes to the website to engage and then has touched your some part of your website, product, downloaded something, attended a webinar, is a warm lead. Again, that is a SDR process, not a BDR process. This is a SDR process. Again, feeds back into the inside sales. Right. So this, so answer is yes for everything.
Fair enough. So I'm going to come to your comment on everything a little bit later. I do have some questions around that. But let's assume that you are a very small startup. You have just started the process and you are experimenting with an inside AE and maybe an SDR, etc. You're just beginning to roll out the process for your remote inside sales. At what point do you begin to figure out that, yes, things are working for me? I mean, people often use this term called go-to-market fit, I guess, after product market fit. So when do you begin to figure out that in your inside sales process, you do have a go-to-market fit? And how do you figure that out?
At what point do you figure that there is a go-to-market fit, that my inside sales process is working?
Exactly.
Right? Okay. I would start from the top of the funnel. Do you have a repeatable machine engine to deliver a consistent number of leads into the funnel? Right? If you have that, whether it's inbound or outbound, that is the beginning of the process, right?
Right.
That's number one, right? Criteria. The moment you do that, are you able to convert every one of those inquiries into, can you qualify them and convert them into an opportunity? Right. Yeah. That's a second step, right? Are you able to repeatably say every week, I'm able to get at least 2 demos, right? In the very early days, at least 2 demos. And then are those demos actually happening? And are you able to convert them, push them down the funnel where you are able to have an engaged conversation, where you are able to get the customer into a trial or are even able to make the sale through that process? Then this process, if it becomes repeatable, that you have a consistent number of sales happening, let's say initial days, like 5 sales a month, 10 sales a month, then you know that, and strangers, right? It's not through your, let's say, a VC network or friends network and all of that. Instead, that process, if you are able to continue consistently able to get that from lead to the closure on a repeatable fashion, I would say you have a good fit, a reasonably good fit.
Got it. Got it. You know, one of the questions that a lot of people, at least a lot of entrepreneurs I have spoken to, ask me is that when you are hiring for inside sales, what kind of talent actually or profiles do work best? Are these people who have done it before? Are these young people? Is there a very specific skill set required to do it? So if you go back, Krish, a little bit to your early days and maybe even compare and contrast, what kind of people were you hiring for inside sales at that point in time? Where did you hire them from? If you had to rethink it today, even for your early stage, what would you do that? What would you do differently for it today?
Right. So I think it goes back to what is the customer really buying, right? The customer is buying your solution and your intent to want to solve their problem. That's why they buy.
Yeah.
So in the very early days, it's less about the process itself. It's more about understanding of the customer problem and selling the solution, right? So in those cases, you want an evangelical salesperson who can also be a consultant, right? Because this person tends to wear many hats to sell, right? So you want an evangelical salesperson. But at the same time, you don't want to search for that unicorn salesperson who can do consulting, can also do a outbound and all of that, right? So it depends on the fit of how you can complement the salesperson, right? Depending on your strength, right? If you have two founders, one person is actually more market focused, and if you can sit in every one of those sales calls in the early days to get to the first million, I would say then you don't need all you need is a salesperson who is able to demonstrate good relationship and can prepare a presentation and then take the customer through, and then you are available as a product expert to solve all of it, right? Because we tend to wear the product hat, pre-sales engineer hat, and also the solutioning hat on behalf of the salesperson, right? And the salesperson's job is to make sure that all the demos are happening, and then you are just making sure you are following through and demonstrating hunger to want to earn the account. Then it's enough, right? But if the founder is not going to be on every call in the very early days, at least a product person or a founder is not going to be there on the calls, by then you would need someone who can also play the pre-sales role, which is an engineer's role of being able to solution for the customer in the very early days, because you have not unpacked all the parts of what makes a sale successful.
Yeah.
Right. In such cases, till the unbundling happens, you would want to think about, do I have the right skill set, right? So in my mind, it's the pre-sales hat of solutioning, the product hat of being able to say, by the time you don't have a published roadmap and all of that, somebody must be available to take the customer through. Here is how I'm envisioning the product. This is what we are building. This is what we intend to build, right? And also be able to take that educated call to say, can I commit this feature to the customer, right? Either immediately or later. You don't have all this process firmed up or written down. Then you would need somebody to complement the salesperson. In the absence of a founder, then you would need to think about what skill set do I want to have to be representing us in front of the customer. That would be one way of thinking about the role.
Got it. I actually have a lot of questions about remote inside sales, even as you begin to scale up. But I think to be careful about the fact that we are able to involve different people in the discussion, I actually do want to open it up relatively early today. I'm already beginning to see questions that are coming on the Q&A sort of board here. And I will maybe begin by picking up a question from there first. And this is also, I guess, an invitation to all the people who are visible on the screen to also feel free to both ask and answer both. So feel free in either direction. So the first question is from Vignesh, which says that, is there a framework that you would recommend to help identify qualified lead criteria for marketing to inside sales handover? And what leading indicators, metrics other than closure can help guide this decision? Excellent question. And again, would love to pose it to all the people. And if Krish, you want to take it, please go ahead as well.
Sure. I think this is the topic that we the topic that we ignored, right? Which is the go-to-market fit. We spoke about the repeatability of the inside sales process, very different from having comfort and knowing you have established product market fit, right? Yes. And those are very different things. And the reason I'm saying this is the product market fit or a segment fit, product segment fit is established only when you know you have a high quality revenue repeatably coming in. It's not just any 100 customers to get to the first million, but actually that's the beginning of knowing, okay, if I have 100 customers, I have $1 million of ARR. If you have 50 customers, or you are like zebra, Like I think there is a book about this, right? Know your zebra or something like that, which is a zebra is something that you cannot miss. It has stripes. Exactly, you know how to define a zebra,
Right.
And can you define your customer like that? I think is the learning, because learning for us, or the inflection point for us, is to know to continue to define the what is called as ICP, ideal customer profile. The characteristics of this is the stack of the customer, right? That a typical customer would be using a HubSpot, right? If you were to define it, right? Let's just say a customer will be using HubSpot, Freshdesk, or Zendesk for the help desk system, and then a CRM would be Salesforce or something else, and like accounting will be QuickBooks. And then if you are able to define the stack of the customer, and then the buyer will be this person, like most likely a CTO or a first developer, or if you sell to a finance person, then you know exactly the level, right? If you are selling to SMBs or the sub 20 million companies, you're not going to expect a CFO in the organization, which means that you should know that it's either a director of finance or an outsourced finance person, virtual CFO. So to that level of definition of what is your ICP, what is a persona, if you define that and hand it over to the inside sales team, right, the marketing team, that definition should be a common understanding between product, marketing, and sales. In hindsight, that is what I would try and create multiple hypotheses to test and validate who are we bringing in as a qualified lead, who do we really want to sell to, right? And you don't want to tighten this too early, because you don't know which segment you will find product market fit, because you're building a product for somebody, right? All of that can change. But at least some kind of a paper definition where there is a common understanding of these are the possible types of buyers, possible types of companies, possible stacks. I think the definition and understanding of what is a qualified lead between these three parties would be very, very helpful. I think then you can start marking as qualified lead. And then if you, once you get 100 customers, you want to tighten that funnel to say ICP should be companies that are sub 10 million, must only be a developer, right, or a CTO. Then you can tighten it up and make sure that these are the only qualified leads. E-commerce is not a qualified lead, or something else is not a qualified lead, right? So you can continue tightening the ICP, and then marketing can bring more of the same qualified leads. So that is how I would approach it. I'll stop here.
Got it. I'm tempted to ask a follow-on question, by the way, to the question that Vignesh asked, which is that as you begin to scale the engine there, is data science itself helping you figure out what should be qualified, what should not be qualified? So essentially, especially if you have a large volume inside sales engine, are you seeing that people using technology itself to be able to do that qualification better?
Clearbit and everything else, there are tools that are actually giving you all the characteristics much better, right? Inside the CRM, those are like Fresh Sales has Clearbit enrichment default into it, and then that's what we use. But that's just one part of it. The gap that we used to have was the common understanding and definition is the problem. But definitely understanding, I think to your question, Alok, knowing which customer should be my ICP, for that you definitely want to spend a lot more time on analyzing the data, right? So either a common data team or the operations team is absolutely essential to understand which segment of customers this has a solid product market fit for me, which ones have the highest usage, which will deliver more net retention rate, revenue retention for me. And then based on that, you might want to come back and define this should be our ideal ICP, right?
Got it.
So technology is useful in the qualification process in the marketing funnel or the sales funnel, but knowing your ICP is a lot of grunt work with a common understanding between product and sales and marketing.
Got it. Given that we have a very high-powered folks on the video screen as well, I'm going to take a quick pause. If anybody else had a point of view on this or actually has a question.
Actually, Alok, I had a separate question, just for the rest of the panelists around, and I heard this a couple of times when working with other founders who are just starting to scale their sales teams. The question comes around the division between AE and SDR or a BDR. And at what point, when they are hiring their first couple of sales guys, should these two people be separate from get-go? Or do you want one person to do both of these?
Excellent question. Given that we have many entrepreneurs on the call, if does anybody other than Krish want to take the question first?
Sure. Because you're asking get-go, right? At the beginning, I would say it should, my preference would be common, right? One person, right? Imagine a founder hiring people, right? So what is the role of the SDR? What is the role of the AE, right? The role of the SDR is to book and make sure that the demo happens, qualify the lead, talk to the customer immediately within 5 to 10 minutes of somebody's reach out. You want to know exactly why did you land on our website, right? What problem actually led you to actually come to our website? What do you use in your current stack? What else are you evaluating, right? Just those 3-4 questions that will tell you so much. And how did you hear about us? 3-4 questions that should tell you most about it, and then show excitement that thank you, right? I mean, you want to welcome them, and then take them through the process to make sure that the demo will happen enthusiastically. And right, that is the job of a SDR. The AE's job is to make sure the closing happens, right? Demo will happen and closing will happen. I would say I would combine these two initially. That's why till you have enough volume building up, right? Because training and making sure if you have inefficiency SDR, you make a wrong SDR hire, or you're not spending enough time with the SDR in every call, then if you are getting 10 leads a week and 4 of them, the really best ones, are actually getting dropped off because you have individual who is making mistakes, then you don't want that, right?
Actually,
I would reduce the point of mistake.
I would point towards more the BDR issue, because a lot of companies don't have a lot of inbound from get-go. So how do you think about BDR? The same way or differently?
BDR should be slightly different. Like BDR, I would say if you're generating outbound leads, you need specialized team which will continue to reach people and try multiple tactics, because anything that works today will become quickly stale and then will not get a response. So it's continuous experimentation and testing and all of that. So that would require a dedicated team. I would say you need somebody who's more like a marketer, who's open to experimentation, who's continuously trying out a lot of things. It should not be the salesperson.
Got it.
I know that one participant has raised their hand, but before we just go to Manu, who has raised his hand, I do want to chime in to the question, Apu, that you asked also. Krish said that, as you begin to scale or you have volume, you can begin to separate. I just wanted to add a nuance to that this question often gets debated in every startup. What is that volume at which you begin to separate those two? At least my bias is that you should separate that as soon as you can. You will realize that the skill sets or the learning that you need to do as an SDR versus as an AE also, because there is a continuous problem solving going in. So at least I now begin to find that even at the 2 to 3 AE level, it is actually worth separating between SDR and AE role, as opposed to waiting till 10. And that actually pays reasonable dividends the sooner you are able to divide. Of course, there is a scale at which you can't divide those, and you should not. But as soon as you can, you should. So Naman, can we enable Manu now to ask the question, or?
Yeah.
So welcome, Manu, all yours. Please go ahead with your question.
Thank you so much, and great insights actually. And thank you, Krish. Thank you, Alok, for this. I wanted to understand, for example, let's say you spoke about inbound, and one of the things is that always companies are looking for how can I get maximum inbound with minimum amount of money, right? Minimum amount of marketing budgets. How do I get more people to come to my website, fill my funnel for the inside sales or the BDR team to call, right? What are your, ideas in terms of how should organizations tackle with that? The inbound versus outbound is always a big question. I wanted to understand what your views of building the inbound engine and enabling the team with the inbound leads.
The answer is likely to be very contextual. Do you mind giving color to the stage of the company, right? The stage of the problem that you are describing?
I would say, it's more in terms of the company. You're right. I mean, it is very contextual. The companies can be focusing on the SMB, or it can be on the enterprise side of it as well. But the company, let's say if the company has about 50, 100 customers already, but haven't figured out their ideal customer profile, like you said, they haven't spotted the zebra yet, but they've got a couple customers, right? And then the sales is hanging on it, saying that get us leads, and what is it that we need to do to get those, right? The easier answer, of course, is to say that splurge the money, but the question is always, where do you do that and how do you do that?
Right. I think you already almost the answer there, right? Which is there are 150 to 100 customers, right? Which customers do we really want? And then working backwards to see the pattern of what is a qualified lead, I think, and then finding the channels through which these leads came in, would be ideal, right? Because we all try those experiments, right? To say, okay, if there are marketing campaigns that are delivering leads, not all campaigns are equal, right? Which is, there will be campaigns which will not deliver good leads. Then there are campaigns which will, the keyword clusters which will deliver bad leads. Let's say, I'm assuming it's Google AdWord or something like that, right? Then working backwards to say how these leads landed into the website, who's converting, and then working backwards to say, at least if you're generating a lead, make sure that this lead is like this customer, right? And giving a sample set of customers would be a good start. And then asking for more leads like that would be a good start. And then leave the marketing team to figure out all the experiments needed to understand that better. Because attribution is hard, right? And it takes time to know your first touch versus multi-touch, right? And all of that. And the tech stack needs to get mature to the point you are able to identify, okay, this is how I'm getting repeatably able to generate these leads or these types of leads. And it requires some amount of time to do that. So I think giving a list of customers like whom you want more of those customers would be a good start. And then allow the optimization to happen. Not sure if it answered all the parts of your question.
Thank you, Krish. I think it does. It definitely does.
I don't know, Rupesh and Ugam, given that both of you are also early stage entrepreneurs, any thoughts on this question?
No thoughts on the question, but I do have a question for Krish. Krish, in your opinion, inside sales for existing category versus new category, is it equally effective? In new category, obviously you have to do a lot of evangelistic thing. How does it work over a phone call, over an email? Any experiences you can share in the early stages? What worked well, what didn't work so well? That would be useful.
Sure. Just to make sure we are on the common page about the new category definition. I mean, I'm assuming like CRM, we know exactly where it starts, where it ends, and a clear category that's established. Versus like 5 years back for us, billing means subscription billing. Where does it start? Where does it end? We don't know. Some people will search for payment gateway term and then land on website and they'll be asking about payment gateway inquiry. Then how do you deal with this? Right? Would that be an appropriate similar kind of a challenge? Or
yeah, I mean let's take that for as an example. Yeah,
right?
I mean something
like
I would say. I mean let's take as a framework that something which people are not searching on Google, right? Which is it's an unknown or the subconscious problem that we believe they are having, and it's going to get worse over the next 5 years. And that's the kind of solution that we are pitching. Right?
I can give a suggestion. Suppose a construction management tool. Like, okay, so people don't use any tool for managing construction projects, and maybe someone is creating that as a new category.
It's a tough one. So your question is more of would inside sales still work, or what kind of inside sales?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Yeah.
Sorry, Krish, I think it is less to do with whether inside sales will work or not. I at least heard the question as, is it going to be inbound lead gen or is it going to be outbound lead gen? Because even in outbound lead gen, you could still do an inside sales. Correct. So Rupesh, is your question about the demand gen piece of it, or is your question about inside sales piece of it?
So it's the, let's say outbound, inbound anyway you will not get, right, for the new category. So when you are doing outbound remotely, then what approaches work best, what tactics to use, because it's going to be evangelistic thing over a phone, over a video, what has worked, what has not worked.
Yeah, I think what you would actually want, right? Let's just say it's an inquiry through a webinar. Right, you conducted a webinar, right? It's a mix of both, right? It's not exactly inside, you did not generate it as a lead, right? It's still not an outbound sales, but somebody read your white paper and then, or they wanted to listen to a webinar and they landed. Then what do you do? I think keeping the conversation warm till it becomes, you don't want to close it in front of the customer in that stage, at that stage, right? You want the warm up to happen till the opportunity is identified. Otherwise, you try to close too soon, you lose the customer. So first is establishing the need. Is that the buyer? I think the typical framework is there, right? Which is it the economic buyer? Is the need established, right? And do they have the budget, time frame, and all of that? I think that discovery process has to happen, right? You need someone who can be If you have the salesperson who can be that patient to actually take that process through, that's fantastic, right? But if the person is under, let's say, the variable pay and all of that, they have to close. They are closer, right? And then it becomes harder to before the lead is ready. It's not an opportunity yet. Then you should probably leave it before the sales process, where you have to figure out the mix of the marketing plus the SDR process, where you are continuing to warm up the opportunity, right? Continue to invite them into different types of either materials that they will download or webinars and other things till it becomes an opportunity. And once it becomes an opportunity, I think the process becomes the same. The ways in which we would engage and warm them up to that point, I think makes the biggest difference in this scenario.
Rupesh, I will add to Krish's talk track here also, which is that at least in the companies that I have been part of, I would say I have actually been guilty of making the assumption that even if it's a new category, inbound demand gen is actually not possible because people are not looking for it. I actually think that just the art and science of inbound demand gen has come so far that there are very many different ways in which you can try and do this. For the sake of just as an example right now, I will just sort of say one thing. See, even if it's a new category, it is not as if there is no other player in the market in that. It may be relatively, for example, let's take your category itself, Rupesh. And by the way, for everyone, Rupesh is the founder of Cognisas. So, but even in that space, you will find that there are 5, 6, 10 companies. They may all be at the early stage. You will find that sometimes even choosing your competitor name as a keyword actually is a very good way of getting started, at least at the very early stage. So you are not looking for 100 new demos every week at the early stage. It may be 5 demos for all. It may be 2 demos early on every week. So see, each of these channels also help you get to a particular volume. So it's not as if the same tactic actually scales forever. And you will have to continuously figure out what are those new tactics that actually work at a different scale also. But whether it's about content marketing, whether it's about using competitor names as a keyword or some other things, sometimes even in new categories, you can actually go with inbound much farther than what you believe you might be able to.
Yeah, the stage of the funnel will vary, right? They're probably not ready to buy, right? Very high in the funnel, all the way to just awareness about their own role. You could invite
it's more educational than
you could arrange a CFO panel, right? Things like that.
Right. Cool. Thank you.
I had actually a question on customer validation. Suppose say like we are using remote inside sales and you are successful in one region. Now you want to go into another region and try to do sales over there, right? The customer validation that you did and the product market fit that you found in one region would be completely different from what it would be in another region. How do you import the best practices from the region that you have been successful into? Because you don't want to start the entire process all over again, right? You don't want to get 1 or 2, then see the product market fit. You want it to be high velocity because you know the product is useful to your client. So what would you suggest would be the best practices, like if you are successful in one region to port it out into another region via remote inside sales?
I would say from a selling process perspective, you would want to keep most things same, right? Which is the qualification process, taking them through the demo and all of that, right? I think what could change is the product market for the geography, like which integrations are necessary for them. Are they using a different stack that your product is talk to? All of that. Sometimes regulation, compliance, and those kind of things could be different from geography to geography, because of which you may not have a product market fit. And sometimes product readiness. I would say most parts, right? You can definitely retain as it is, right? Am I missing anything, Ugam? Sorry.
More importantly is about, like the customer culture in any particular country with respect to others. Like there are some countries where the usage of software is much higher. Suppose say you are starting to sell in US and the number of a number of companies brought it just because of the fact that they have integrations with other software. Now you go into Europe, say Eastern Europe, where the usage of other softwares, like which was the core value proposition of your product is less. So you would have to like reinvent it a bit in terms of, how you try to sell and how you try to, solve a customer's problem. So in terms of if you are trying to move into from one region to another, what would you suggest would be the best practice? Like keep this in mind and then build from there.
Right. I would say definitely watch out for all the questions that are coming from the customer. Right. I think if there is volume, then the tools like either Gong or Wingman, one of those tools really helps you listen to the questions that are coming in, which competition is being mentioned by the customer as comparison, all of those. I think having the objection handling becomes a key. So as a founder who is still assisting the selling process in every geography, my recommendation would be, or whoever is in charge of this, paying close attention to the questions from the customer and then helping the salesperson with the objection handling. We have to think of it as, okay, every objection handling that you did in the previous one will not work here. The battle cards that you probably had to answer questions about competition, value prop, all of that will probably require validation in another geography, right? So I would say look at all the materials, right? And then if you are presenting this case study as a follow-up, is this going to work here in this region? Is the customer asking for personalization, localization, internationalization, and other capabilities which are very different from this region, right? I would say thinking about all of that materials, all of that is getting created, all those I would definitely validate. Sometimes one more thing is who is the buyer or the person who's evaluating will also change by certain geographies. For example, US, it's mostly the direct buyer, the economic buyer generally evaluates most of the time. But you go to Australia or some other regions, people come across consultants, right? So a lot of geographies, consultants actually play a role in the evaluation. Then suddenly, the consultant wants to look good before the client, right? They don't even call them customers, right? Client, and they evaluate on behalf of the client. Then you have to sell yourself, and so that they are able to sell you to the customer. Selling process completely changes. I would say qualifying some of those and paying close attention to those details, I think would change. But from inside out, for most of the process related things, I don't think many things will change. It's the paying close attention to all these details, I think would be very helpful to establish product market fit very quickly in another region. At least those are things that we look at.
Yeah, just as a follow-up, I know there's a question actually has been asked on a Q&A, but like since I've already asked the question, is having a presence of inside sales within that particular region really important for you to actually make the sale? Like I talked about changing from one region to another, right? Like from US to Eastern Europe. Now, if you were initially trying to build out of US, like is it recommended that you have a salesperson and an office in Eastern Europe, for example, to do these sales? Because they would know the customers outright, they have better relationships, or the best practices in inside sales is like have them in a single location. Like just wanted to understand from that perspective.
Sure. My answer would be, I want to make sure I put the caveat here. Our experience comes from selling in North America, Western Europe, right? Mostly Western, 60% North America, 35% Western Europe, then 5 to 10% APAC, right? That's the mix of customers we have. And that's the experience from which I speak. I don't think we necessarily have to have inside sales in every geography to start with, right? But now we have inside sales in every geography because it allows us to improve the conversion rates, and then we are able to hire better talent in those markets to complement, right? For a bigger ACV deals and all of that. We do that deliberate, but we did not scale using that to the first tens of millions before we started hiring any of those local salespeople. Not necessary. It's not conditional at all, at least in these geographies. Even sales deals up to, let's say, 50K, 100K, you can close from here, ACV. The criteria becomes unpacking the support system necessary to make a salesperson successful. Which is, do you have the pre-sales person? The moment we cross the 2-3 salespeople, and then you are trying to add, let's say, $1 more million in the new year, another year, right? If you want new 1 million, if you're at $1 million, you're trying to go to a $3 million, you're trying to add, let's say, $2 million of 1 to 3 million means $2 million delta needs to be added net of churn. Now, let's say some 200K will come from your existing customers' growth. NRR is 20%, 200K comes. You still want 1.8 million. And that means you are looking at least what? Every salesperson carrying a quota of, let's say, 540K, which is, or 720K is $5,000, right? Or let's say 540K, $4,000 per month quota. MRR, right? $4,000 MRR or 540K annual. That means you will need at least 4 salespeople, which is 1.3x of sales capacity, so that you are able to hit the $1.5 million, right? So 4 salespeople are needed. 4 salespeople, each of them carrying at least $500,000 quota, right? So $2 million sales capacity to hit 1.5 million. And those 4 people, suddenly if you're going to ramp up 3 more people or 2 or 3 more people, the founder took so much time, or somebody took so much time to train and then support them. Now suddenly these 3 people are going to be like thrown in. Who's helping them with the gap in the knowledge, ramp up? We are not going to be able to sit in every call to support them and all of that. Then what happens? We have to, then the support system required to make these 4 people becomes more critical than everything else. It's not the geography, any of that, right? It's actually the internal constraint of knowing, do I have the pre-sales engineer tagged for every salesperson so that somebody is available to answer every question? Are they trained well on the product? Who's going to sit and train them for first 2 months to make sure they really know the product inside out? The ramp up time takes anywhere between 3 to 6 months, right? And then making sure they have enough leads that are going into them, deals that are opportunities created for every one of the salespersons, so they have enough number of deals, 3x coverage in the pipeline. And who's measuring that they have enough coverage in the pipeline? And who's monitoring if the deals are progressing through every stage, right? Now suddenly we are talking about unpacking every part of the sales machine itself, right? Which we did not generally don't have to pay attention to if it is just 2 people, and then we will support and do everything, because we tend to wear most hats and then support them intuitively. And the moment it's 4 people, 5 people, that's when the scaling starts. All these things start crumble, start feeling like shaky foundation, because we do not have the support system yet. And that's when all these other pieces start coming in to make the person successful. So it's actually, in my opinion, it's actually not geography or anything else.
Actually, Krish, I'm going to ask one of the questions that that someone has put on the Q&A board here, which is related. Sure. Is that, and particularly in your case, because you say that you have put inside sales in different geographies as well. The question is that how do you overcome the language barrier for handling sales remotely from India? Let's take Western Europe as an example. You are selling in Germany or France. Now you talked about the fact that you are putting sales in different regions from a talent or skill perspective to close larger ACV deals. Have you had to put a sales machinery, even if it's inside sales, in these countries because of a language issue?
Like we are very fortunate to sell to customers who are mostly English speaking, right? At least to a reasonable level, the business language is English, because they are also global. Their customer base is also global in most cases.
True.
Right? We are fortunate that way. But if you are into a market where your customers don't speak English, then sorry, you will definitely have to think about making sure you have people who can speak the language. So once people, let's say France or Italy, people actually are apologetic when our people reach out and then speak to them. They'll be like, I'm more comfortable writing. My English is not that good, right? And people actually are very sweet, and then they tell you, so I'm going to speak slowly, right? We tend to speak too fast, like this, right? And so they are apologetic when they tell you that, okay, my English is not great, and then so slow down, all of that. So language is actually not the barrier, at least if there is a reasonable, their business language is English. I think use it as a qualifying criteria. The second is having language trainer inside the team is helpful. At least arranging for some kind of course, online course, for our team to be sensitive to some of these nuances, right, is generally very helpful. Even in the very early days, everybody can do with some coaching, right? Can take some coaching, even if it is not a full-time person. Just taking some online course, watching a video together to be able to talk about it, even if it is 1 hour per like once in 2 weeks. It goes a long way in people being more conscious and cognizant of the mistakes we make while dealing with a customer. Right? Whether it's written, spoken English or spoken, I think it's generally helpful. And at certain scale, you can also hire those people to continuously monitor, coach, right? All of that. If it is English speaking, the conversion rate in UK sometimes used to be poorer compared to all other geographies in Europe, all the countries in Europe. And then you wonder why, right? If you're selling in US, you should be selling in UK. But US is the one where we don't sell well. Yeah. Why? Right? You realize that SDR process is the biggest bottleneck.
Yeah.
Because you're not able to engage and then get the person to become a demo. You're not able to impress, and then you wonder, and then you go start listening to the calls and you realize that we don't get their humor, right? Conversation striking ability is very different, right? Then it requires us to carefully pick the people that you want to represent a particular geography, which is actually English speaking, compared to all the non-English speaking.
Actually, to Krish's point, Alok, just one more thing based on my experience selling in Southeast Asia as well, and very few smaller SaaS companies target Southeast Asia, but some enterprise companies do. Was there an SDR who was doing a very good job of, doing the demos and, was taking forward from there. When they were brought into Indonesia and when we were doing SDR from India, the demo show-up rate just went down dramatically. And that all, to Krish's point, how do you engage? Even though someone has signed up for a demo, for them to actually then show up on that demo, you have to really follow up well. And you have to have that personal connect. And then when we had the SDR in Indonesia, local SDR, the rates were back to normal. So I think just to the same point as Krish mentioned. Yeah.
Very interesting. I think somebody by the name Sid had actually raised his hand way back, and we probably, I don't know if he's still on the call and available. If not, we are going to...
Alok, I just want to answer one more thing related to that, right?
Sure.
The mental math that we do, early days, we are extremely scrappy. I come from bootstrap days, 2 years of bootstrapping, and we are very scrappy when it comes to a lot of things. And we think a lot about, should I hire somebody locally? Like in the case of Indonesia, right? But if you think about it, every lead, to get a lead, you may be spending $100 per lead, giving 200 leads to one salesperson, right? And which means that you are actually spending so much money to generate those 100 leads, $10,000 or something. And yet you think so much about spending $5,000 to hire that one person, right? And your win rate can go up significantly. So it's a math. There is a problem, especially mental block. So just wanted to bring it up.
Very good point. Very welcome, Sid. Please go ahead, ask your question.
Hi, I'm Sid here. I'm the founder of a very early stage SaaS company. One of my questions was kind of answered with respect to having inside sales teams within these geographies. But another thing I was really curious to know and ask Krish is, I'm at that stage where I've not even got my first customer. So I'm really curious, how did you sell and acquire your first few customers, like your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, first 5 customers? Was it through just network, your connections? Or let me just rephrase that, first 5 customers that you did not know, these are strangers that you sold to. How did you get those customers?
So I'll be very careful about this part, which is, our early customer is 8-year-old playbook, right? It took 4 years for us to establish proper product market fit. From that point to get to the point where things started scaling nicely. And so I don't want to color your judgment by quoting how we got those customers, but I think some common playbooks are still the same, which is you have to be the evangelist of you should deeply demonstrate that care about the problem the customer has. The founder is the salesperson, right? And do you understand the problem? Do you latch onto the customer's problem that you are able to resonate and establish that connect? And can you be the solution consultant to ensure that the customer's problem is solved completely, that you are offering a solution, not just a product? I think that mindset to approach the early customers is extremely important. The difference between offering a solution to the customer and selling a product is you are just not going to leave it to them to figure out all the other pieces to make them successful. The problem does not get solved just because we sell a product, right? The solution is the one that is going to solve the problem for the customer. That difference is the one that is needed to get the first 10-20 customers, in my opinion.
Got it. Thanks so much. That's good to know.
Thanks.
I know there are a number of other people who have raised their hands. I am tempted to ask a question, sorry, and Naman, you're going to hate me for this thing, but I don't want to let Krish go, just given how far they have scaled this engine. So for anybody who is, let's say, slightly later stage entrepreneur on the call today. So Krish, let's say that from the collective, all the questions that have been asked today, you do the initial experimentation, you somehow hire your first AE, second AE, third AE, SDRs, BDRs, you get the engine going. Now you have moved forward in life. You are at a 1 million, 2 million ARR now. So engine is beginning to churn, something is working, there is a go-to-market fit. And now you think that your only job is to just put your foot on the pedal, just hire more. Now, as you start scaling this engine, what begins to go wrong at that point and what do you need to change? And how do you even begin to get to know that something is going wrong, what do you begin to measure? So what changes as you begin to scale in this engine as opposed to just at the starting point?
Right. And we all tend to think that, okay, if we are able to sell with 1 or 2 salespeople to get to the first million, then it's just like drawing that Excel sheet where add 4 more salespeople, it's supposed to work, right? And it doesn't, because the sales capacity of every salesperson will carry 500,000 quota or 720K quota annually. But the problem is what makes them successful. Unpacking, right? I think we touched upon this briefly. Unpacking that becomes very critical, and setting up the support system becomes critical. That's why the investment necessary as you scale becomes more to make sure these salespeople, new salespeople, are successful. Because as a founder, you are able to spend every demo call, you will lovingly go and sit. And after the first 2 years, you also tend to get tired, right? You cannot work through the day and then also sit in the calls during the night and all of that. There are only so many years you can do that, and for only so many salespeople. Beyond that, once you get 4 or 5 salespeople, you don't want all of them reporting to you. The moment you bring in, one failure point is a good sales manager who can be a coach, right? You don't want to get your best quota carrying salesperson to become the salesperson to become the coach. So that becomes your biggest challenge. That's step one, right? But even before that, let's take one step back. Let's just say you want to hire 3 or 4 more salespeople, training them, right? Taking responsibility for onboarding, just like how you have to take responsibility for onboarding an engineering team. You have to think about the first 3 months of getting a salesperson ramped up. I think we miss out on that because the support system doesn't exist, right? That's one big lesson. Number 2 is making sure there is a pre-sales person to support every salesperson, because your first 2 salespeople may be evangelical, consultative, unicorn salespeople. But beyond that, trying to hire those people is harder and harder, gets harder and harder. So you want salespeople who can be trained on the process, they can genuinely answer questions, should know. Your expectation is they should want to deeply care about wanting to know the product, but that's necessary, right? So how do you then solve for it? Split the role. Salesperson's job is to make sure CRM is followed, every lead is followed up. They are accountable for every lead, every deal, and they stay true to being accountable to marketing team to say, hey, I followed up on every lead. I didn't drop a single thing. That's their job, and keep the relationships warm, right? Show hunger to the customer. But the pre-sales person is a solutions person. I think in India, that advantage is there are a number of people, thousands and thousands of people in the services companies who have studied, we all study engineering and go into IT services, right? And there is a generation of people, right, with 3-year, 5-year experience who actually know how to put the solutions together. Amazing people who can pick up the product very easily, latch onto this, who actually have they have done some level of development also, but don't want to do that, want to do, like, let's say, want to do an MBA in 2 years, or they have done MBA, also worked in TCS, Infosys, Cognizant, Accenture, IBM, and all these companies. Hire them, complement the salesperson. The returns are phenomenal because this person will pick up the product in a matter of 1 month. They will complement your salespeople as the best salespeople because the customer actually is buying the solution, not the salesperson. They stay engaged because of the salesperson. I think thinking about the support process, I think, Alok, is the biggest thing that you can do to yourself to scale and make sure the salesperson is successful to meet their quota.
Couldn't agree more. I know we have limited time. Gagan, you have been wanting to ask a question. So please go ahead. Or make a comment. I don't know whether you're asking a question or making a comment.
No, I was asking a question earlier. But so anyways, my question was for you, Alok. And maybe Krish, you can also answer if you have an insight. So for SMB focused businesses, where ACV is like from 1,000 to 3,000 on an average, I'm just taking that. What are the key factors you have to take care in terms of like setting up the inside sales process or the lead gen process? Like what are the key factors which companies have to take care? Like it's a very basic question for early stage entrepreneurs, but I thought this will be relevant.
Yeah. You want?
I'm going to ask Krish to answer because I don't have anything.
Yeah, we have. Yeah. So we sell a lot of 4K deals, right? Which is the $4,000 ACV deals. Yeah. And then we look at it as 3 segments, right? Actually 4, right? Premium, and then the 4K to the 6K deals, and then the 12K to 25K, right? 25K to the 250K kind of segments. Like 3 segments: startup, scale up, and grow. The startup segment, you would want to make sure that your selling cycle is faster. It is long term. It has to be as self-service as possible with very short sales cycle. You cannot throw the 2 in a box model, which is a pre-sales plus sales, is not sustainable long term for you to scale that, because you're only going to make $4,000 ACV, right, per annum. And per salesperson, the quota is, there is a limit to number of people that number of deals a salesperson can win, right? Even if you put the best salesperson, if the quota is, let's say, $4,000 per month, then they have to win 10 deals to do that, right? 10 deals means how many opportunities they need to chase. If you have a 25% win rate, 40 deals per month, right? And probably they are dealing with 60 conversations, right? So think about all of this. And then if you think the sales cycle is going to take 2 months, then suddenly they have to be dealing with 120 parallel conversations before they can actually close 10 every month. So if you extrapolate that, then all of that complexity becomes a mathematical problem in their head, right? How many conversations can I really chase really well? So shorter sales cycle is the recipe for that, which means that in 21 days, you should have closed and moved on, right? Otherwise, they are going to definitely ignore all the leads that even if they are the best leads and deals, opportunities, the recency bias will take over. They will chase the latest reply or the latest one that is flowing in. So think about the sales cycle and the number of conversations that an individual has to chase and keep warm. I think these two becomes a constraint for the salesperson to be successful.
So can we say number like 1 or 2 calls, the sales conversion has to happen?
1 or 2 calls? Correct, right? Or think about it in couple of calls, but more importantly, the number of follow-ups needed and how long do you have to follow up?
Yeah, I would, Gagan, just to add to that, I think about 3 variables in sales always, which is value, which is the ACV, the volume, and the velocity. And one would find that the volume and velocity have a very high correlation and usually inversely correlated to the value.
Right.
And ultimately, they lead to your CAC and ACV equation that you have to be mindful of, to the point that Krish was making. So, there might be situations where you will find that you are getting only $2,000 for a sale, but your sales process, frankly, is not getting aligned to the velocity that is required and the CAC that is required. So you may also choose, I think this process will also lead you to a point where you may choose not to serve a segment also, which is fine in the end. Because you may realize that, look, if the amount of education is so high in a product, and you have to go through answering 20 questions like, how do I integrate this with 7 other systems? Well, you might realize that, look, this is not even worth selling at this price. Right. So it may become a product market fit question, in fact, at some point, as opposed to a sales question. So keeping in mind that CAC to ACV equation with volume and velocity in mind for that value, I think is just super critical to answer at all points in time.
Well,
so folks, I know actually there are so many questions which are still on the board. But given that we have reached the end of our time, I do want to thank all the people on the screen, particularly Krish, for agreeing to be on the call today, being generous with sort of giving his opinions, but to everyone else as well who attended today and was participative. And there is just a ton to learn. I mean, every time at least people like these speak, there is just so much to learn. So thank you so much for joining today. And in another 2 weeks, we'll have the next edition on the next topic that we'll be announcing soon. But if in the meantime, if you have thoughts on what topic you would like to have a chat on, please do send those to us as well.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed answering this question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.